and I'm the founding director of the Cinema Honors, and it's a real pleasure to be here at Getting Real. Thanks to everyone at the IDA to have this conversation with Carolyn Bernstein. Carolyn has been at National Geographic for the last 7.5 years, and through her leadership of National Geographic documentary films, has been behind some of the prestige artistic documentary of the last half decade. Films including Jane, LA 92, The Cave, The Rescue, The First Wave, Becoming Cousteau, and of course, Free Solo, which won the Best Documentary Oscar amongst many other awards and grossed nearly $30 million worldwide box office. So it'll be a fun conversation, but first, please welcome Carolyn Bernstein.
Thank you.
So when I was reading up on your history, I was excited to see some of your narrative fiction television background, in particular to see that you had some input both on Dawson's Creek and Gilmore Girls. So those are both like real character-driven, shows of the late '90s, early aughts. What was that experience like, and how does that still kind of play a role in how you look at storytelling and even documentary right now?
So I was the head of drama development at the WB network for about 7 years, from I think around 99 to maybe 2006 or so. So yeah, I developed Dawson's Creek actually as a studio executive, and then the experience was a very positive one. And then the folks at the WB hired me to come over there. So, I think I've been a scripted drama executive. I've worked in comedy as well, but primarily in television drama for almost 30 years, a long time. So that really is my primary background as a storyteller and as a supporter of storytellers. So, I mean, there's all sorts of fun stories I could tell you about Gilmore Girls and Dawson's Creek and One Tree Hill and Smallville and all these fun shows I worked on. The nice thing about working on those shows was that we worked with a lot of first-time showrunners and a lot of first-time actors, because if you remember any of those shows, they were kids who starred in them. So it was a really, really fun, creatively satisfying experience to give people these first opportunities. I think in terms of how that sort of relates to what I'm doing now. So just for clarity's sake, I'm still the head of scripted at Nat Geo. That's why I was hired originally to come over to Nat Geo to start a dedicated scripted business for then the channel. We are still a channel, but we're a bigger content business now. And, I think there's certain things that I think about when I'm developing a scripted drama, and I've definitely applied some of those learnings to my work at Nat Geo Doc Films, now that I've taken over Docs as well. And you touched on something that is probably one of the major things I always think about, which is characters, and how important it is to find, I know they're not called characters in documentaries, but I do always think about wanting to tell character-driven stories, people-driven stories about people on a very specific human journey, with obstacles in their way, with obstacles to overcome, setbacks, triumphs and tragedies along the way. And I think while we do definitely at Nat Geo have movies that explore really important topics and that are sort of topical and timely, I think I always think about the best way to sort of dive deep into those stories is through character. So there's when I first took over Docs, I remember there were a few people who were like, "That's crazy. You're a scripted executive. How are they at all similar?" And the answer is they're totally similar in that storytelling is storytelling. And I think, with documentaries, what we're trying to avoid, obviously, in our storytelling is something that feels like a Wikipedia entry. Because if you could just Google the subject and find out everything you wanted to know, we don't really need to make a film. And so, what I'm always thinking about is what is kind of the story behind the story? Who are the people behind the story? What is the human element that sort of can help people connect to the subjects that we're trying to explore and deepen people's understanding through character, again, through that kind of human journey? So I think there are a lot of similarities. At the WB, I only told coming of age stories. At some point, I aged out of that. When I was in my mid 30s, I was like, I have to get out of here. I maybe my late 30s. It was sort of, I left that to someone younger, but it was really fun at the time.
You were talking about how you can get into these stories through characters. It made me think so much of The Cave, which is, we at that point, I think we had seen several Syrian documentaries. There'd obviously been a lot about it in various news channels and reports, but we hadn't seen that story of that doctor in that hospital. And that, I think it really, for me at least as a viewer, it changed how I saw the whole conflict, because I was seeing it through the eyes of this woman.
Yeah, and I think that's a really good example. Dr. Amani Balour, who was our central subject in that film, was a perfect example of, through a very specific character story, you can explore universal themes. And a story that is very hard, I think, for people to get their arms around. What was happening on the ground in Syria. It's overwhelming, it's disturbing, it's upsetting. Through Dr. Amani, this very unlikely everyday superhero is kind of how we thought of her. You can start to understand both her very specific personal journey and also these bigger themes that we're trying to explore and this bigger, timely, topical story. But again, always through character. And I think there were some other sort of secondary characters in that documentary that really resonated as well. And so one of the, I wouldn't even call it a note, but some of the feedback that we gave for us, our wonderful director, Firas Fayyad, was, as much as you can, dig deeper into character, always dig deeper into character, because I think it just helps people, again, the micro helps people understand the macro is sort of how I think of it. The specific and personal then gets people to understand the universal.
Is that one of the things that makes you know whether something is a Nat Geo project? If someone comes to you, like, is it like, oh, I can see that character being important or a story that is worth telling? Is that like one of the key things that makes something a Nat Geo film?
100%. And, I think I'm always looking for a kind of, we talk a lot about everyday heroes, everyday superheroes, but just kind of outsized, charismatic characters at the center of a story, whose journey has some surprises along the way. I think, I'll use Becoming Cousteau as an example. I think many people, at least if you're 40 plus, knew who Jacques Cousteau was, understood, why he was important, a little something about the work he had done. But what was really important in that story that Liz Garbus, our director, found is that prior to him becoming a protector of the ocean, he was an exploiter of the ocean. And that was news to me. It was news to Liz. It was news to all of us working on the doc. And that was our eureka moment, because then we had a character arc. Then we had a character going from here all the way over to here. And that character journey became the spine of the doc. So, we knew it was a big, beautiful, interesting life to explore, but it got really interesting when we discovered that his early history had been very, very different from the way that I think we all think of him today.
I mean, you talk about that film and also thinking about Jane as an example of here are things that might to the outside be like, oh, well, that's a natural fit for Nat Geo. These are people who've been part of that brand or that universe for a long time. But in both cases, you went with directors who told the story in, I think, kind of an unexpected way. I mean, Brett's approach to Jane is beautiful and the evocative in terms of the score by Philip Glass. I mean, it's not a paint by numbers. You know, this is everything you've already seen about Jane Goodall. But then you also are doing these other projects like LA92 as an example that maybe you wouldn't think of as being like a natural fit in for the brand. So where are those margins for you? Like, do you have to go like, well, how does it fit in here? Even it's got a great character, but I don't know. It's
We do have to think about that. And you know, the brand is our North Star, is what differentiates us from all the other financiers and streamers and everyone else who are making docs right now. So the brand is, I think, pretty elastic. I always say it contains multitudes. So, and the way I think of the brand is we need to tell stories that deepen people's understanding of the world and their role in it. I memorized that. And I say it all the time. And I actually have a post-it on my computer that says it in case I forget the words, because it's a really important idea for me and for my team. This idea that it's not about, yes, we do a lot of science storytelling and storytelling around the natural world and, you know, environmental issues, but it's really in a larger sense about deepening people's understanding of the world and their role in it. And I think when we use that as our North Star, something like LA92 can make sense. So Jane is sort of a no-brainer, right? But if we're going to make Jane, we want to do it in a way that is surprising. Because again, I think surprises are such an important thing for viewers, not to mention we're making, you know, the goal with most of our docs, they're going to be in theaters, is to have a cinematic experience. And we knew Brett Morgan would provide that. I think with LA92, it was the same idea. I would cite, she's in the audience now, I'm not sure where she is, but Sarah Dosa's documentary Fire of Love is a beautiful example of, it's a science doc in some ways, in that it's about two intrepid scientists who were, you know, volcanologists who went all over the world studying this thing that they loved. But it's such a beautiful, elevated cinematic experience. And so we're always trying to figure out, in terms of filmmakers we work with and the subject matter we tackle, you know, what's a great subject for Nat Geo and how do we elevate it? How do we raise it up so that non-documentary viewing, well, non-doc lovers are still going to love it? And I always joke, I'm the perfect person to run Nat Geo doc films. I do love documentaries, don't get me wrong, but I come out of scripted and I haven't been working, I've been working in scripted for 30 years, but I haven't been working in docs for 30 years. So I always think, you know, I'm a good litmus test. I was a comparative literature major. I wasn't a science major. So, you know, it has to be something that resonates with me and with the regular people that I, you know, in my family and other friends who are not, you know, in the doc business, who aren't necessarily seeking out docs, but still love a beautiful, elevated cinematic experience. So that's a lot of what we think about.
how do doc filmmakers compare to fiction filmmakers? Like, what is the most interesting contrast?
Um, I would say, you know, artists are, you know, in both media equally passionate, equally perfectionist, and, you know, a little neurotic. A little neurotic, I think, applies to both areas. But, you know, I see my job and my team's job primarily as, you know, we're here to support artists. That's what we do. Um, it's not about giving a million notes or, you know, telling people what our vision is. Our vision is irrelevant. It's the vision of the artist. if we've commissioned a project that and the artist has told us what their vision is, our job is to support that vision. Sometimes we course correct, or we will give some feedback here and there, but our job really isn't. I think people sometimes think like network executive jobs or whatever I am now, sort of both a network executive and a streaming executive, I guess. Content curation is about giving notes. It really isn't. My notes are like, I always joke now, they're like a haiku. They're very brief and to the point. Our job is really to support artists. So back to your question, I think it's the same thing in scripted. When someone tells you what their plan is and you say, amazing, here's some money and let's go do this together, you don't want to then impose your point of view on them. You want to figure out how to help them achieve what they're trying to achieve, which isn't always easy. But I think, storytellers are storytellers, whether it's scripted or docs. I think in docs, maybe one major difference is there is this impact element to some of the docs we make. So we do work with some filmmakers who are very focused on the kind of, the impact effect and work that their documentary is going to have. So that's different than Dawson's Creek, which is a great show, but just entertainment. So that's one difference.
There was a recent article that talked about this kind of a sameness of some distributors, that projects needed to kind of feel the same, they kind of needed to look the same, that beats of story should happen at the same points. And I think you mentioned Fire of Love, and we can talk also about The Territory and Retrograde, your three features this year. I think what's striking is how different they are from one another, not just in topic, but in the way that they're made, by who made them. And that's, I don't know if that's something that you set out specifically to do, but how important is that, the diversity, that your projects feel very different from one another?
Sure. That is totally by design, in that I always think about we need to have a diverse portfolio of films and a diverse group of filmmakers that we work with. And I think this year is a really good example, because we have The Territory. The major thing that our filmmaker Alex Pritz thinks about with The Territory is impact. So obviously we want as many people to see it as possible, but he's really thinking, and we're helping him with it, about the impact that film can have. He is a first-time filmmaker. Then we have Fire of Love, Sarah's movie. She's a sort of mid-career filmmaker. I think it's her third feature. Sarah, you here? I think it's your third feature, right? Yeah. Okay. And that film is a completely different animal than The Territory. The Territory is sort of an edge of your seat, almost like a suspense thriller. Fire of Love is just a beautiful, passionate, kind of art house explosion of cinematic imagery and celebrating the natural world and people's passion for the natural world. I mean, I could go on, but it's very, very different from The Territory. And that both The Territory and Fire of Love were acquisitions for us. And then Retrograde, which was an original commission, is from Matt Heineman, who's an Oscar-nominated director. So he's further along in his career trajectory. And that one is a very journalistic, verite war movie, really. So they couldn't be more different from one another. And I think it's really important for us, because we don't want to cannibalize ourselves, and we don't want the filmmakers that we work with to feel, we want each of them to feel like they're in their own very specific lane, getting kind of bespoke support from us. It's not one size fits all, and it's definitely not one size fits all in terms of the kinds of feedback we give our film teams and the kind of strategy we create around each film. It's really bespoke, which is why we only do about 4 movies a year. We don't have the bandwidth to do 8. I bet if we did 8, it would be more one size fits all. But because we do 3, 4, 5 films a year, we can really figure out a strategy that makes sense for each film, and you know, again, support each filmmaker's vision, which is what we, you know, begin and end with.
You mentioned Retrograde was a commission, and I know that was a long time you were with that film. Is there in your mind, is there a best case of when you come on board, or what the journey of your journey with the film is?
The answer is we really come in at every stage of a film's life cycle. I mean, most of our films are original commissions. I'd say a majority of them are, where we come in at the idea stage when it's just a sort of a twinkle in the filmmaker's eye. They haven't shot anything. There's probably a deck and a sizzle, maybe. Sometimes not even. Sometimes it's just a really deep 90-minute conversation and we say, okay, let's do it. That only happens when it's filmmakers that we really, really know well, and who have a sort of a body of work that precedes them. But so sometimes we come in at the inception of the idea. Sometimes with a movie like The Cave, we came in after production had started, but before it ended. I think it was about a third of the way through. And we also do acquisitions. So as I said, Territory and Fire of Love this year. We've never had 2 before. It's usually, if in every cycle, if we have 4 films, usually 1 is an acquisition. So this year, we were only planning on 1, but then we had 2 that we fell madly in love with. So we had to do it. But I would say there isn't, I mean, maybe ideally just for me and my team, because it's so much fun and sort of satisfying creatively. We like to be involved from the very inception of the idea, but you know, I think we feel equally attached to and kind of inspired by the films that are commissions and the films that are acquisitions. You know, if you fall in love, you fall in love. It doesn't matter at what point, you know, and we really don't acquire anything that we're not in love with. My boss and I often use as a litmus test, you know, this sounds very dramatic, but I do come out of drama. We say, you know, would we die if we didn't get this movie? And it sounds crazy, but we do use that litmus test. And with Fire of Love and The Territory, we felt that we would die if we didn't get those movies. So it's, you know, I think we try to lead with passion the same way that our filmmakers do.
You mentioned theatrical, and you know, Fire of Love had a very robust theatrical this summer, grossed over $1 million. How important is theatrical? I mean, you have a great streaming platform waiting for you. The films have a great home to head toward, but how important is theatrical on that journey?
So it's important for some films, but not all films. And I think I go back to the idea of us having kind of a bespoke strategy around each film. So there are some films like Fire of Love where when we saw it, we said, this is such a super cinematic experience. Of course, this has to have a theatrical. There are some films like Ron Howard's film, We Feed People, where the themes of that movie, the messages of that movie felt so urgent. We wanted to get it onto Disney Plus as quickly as possible, especially because World Central Kitchen at that point had just landed in Ukraine and was doing all of this important work on the ground, feeding people over 1 million meals a day. And I think Ron and everyone else involved felt like, let's push this out as quickly as possible to as many people as possible. A theatrical run doesn't do that from a sort of getting as many eyeballs as possible perspective. That's the power of Disney Plus. So theatrical is important as sort of one of the arrows in our quiver, but we don't always use that arrow. It just depends on what the movie is. And we always make these decisions in conjunction with our film team. So, you know, they're not unilateral decisions, but there are some filmmakers. Again, We Feed People is a great example where Ron was like, get it on Disney Plus right now. Like, we need to get Jose Andres is again an everyday superhero. Let's let the world know about this wonderful work he's doing. It'll help with fundraising, with with World Central Kitchen's fundraising. Um, so different films have different priorities.
We're open to audience questions in just a second, but I just wanted to follow up since you mentioned, Disney Plus, and there's obviously like the Disney family as a whole, and there are other people inside that family, Hulu, ESPN, who also make feature documentaries. How does that relationship work? Is there ever a time when you're like, oh wait, Hulu, no, that's.
We do talk to our colleagues at the other divisions that make documentaries all the time. We actually have a monthly meeting with them. So far, I'm just scrolling through my brain, but I think so far there hasn't been any situation where we've had to duke it out with another division at Disney. I mean, the truth is, we wouldn't set up a bidding war between us and Hulu. I think we would probably decide internally through a very collegial conversation, you know, which area it made more sense for. I don't know if Hulu uses the litmus test, will we die if we don't get this film? So I feel like we might win just based on that, but it hasn't happened yet because we have a really specific brand. I mean, the brand is everything to us. We're not a general entertainment brand. It's more specific than that. So the kinds of movies that we gravitate towards are not the ones that, so far at least, that ESPN or Hulu or Onyx or ABC News. I mean, there's FX is now doing feature docs, but so far we've all been able. I can't speak for everyone else, but we've been in a specific lane, and it hasn't gotten. There was no infighting so far. Yeah.
All right, let's see who has some questions in the audience. Because I've got more. I can keep going, but I'd love to hear what you guys have some thoughts about. There's someone here in the fifth row, I think.
Hello, I'm Jason. Thank you for doing this. Obviously, Nat Geo is known, especially recently, for these really big, beautiful, amazing documentaries. But I feel like there's really big, amazing short film documentaries that don't have a platform. And I'm wondering, and I know that Nat Geo has done things in that space historically, is that something that might be an opportunity in the future?
Yes, I feel like even though I didn't set up this question, I'm very happy you asked because we do have a doc short this year called The Flag Makers that just premiered at Camden. That is from two directors, Cynthia Wade and Sharon Leese, and it is about the refugees and immigrants from all over the world who make American flags at a flag factory in the middle of the country, in the middle of Wisconsin. And it is the most beautiful, inspiring, thought-provoking story. It's a short, it's 3 minutes long, something like that. And I would say, doc shorts are not part of our they're not part of our strategy on a kind of a day-to-day basis, but The Flag Makers is a good example. When Cynthia, one of the directors, brought it to me, it felt like, talk about deepening people's understanding of the world and their role in it. It was such a bullseye for us. Cynthia is an Oscar-winning doc short maker, director. So we immediately said, yes. We've made a couple in the past, and maybe 2 or 3 years ago, we had one called Night Crawlers that was really terrific. We had another one called Lost and Found that we loved also, that Orlando von Einsendel directed. So, we've had a few here and there. It's not something that we have to do every year, but it's something that we're open to if the right thing comes along. So I'm glad you asked that because we do have a terrific one this year. Oh, and I should mention Giannis Antetokounmpo, the Greek freak on the Milwaukee Bucks, is an executive producer on that doc because he also, his parents were refugees. He is an immigrant from Greece, and he is really in love with it, which is so nice. So we've got a really good team on that one.
Other questions over here? Let's wait till the microphone comes over.
Can you raise your hand? Oh, sweet. Thank you. Thank you for this talk. My question is around distributors of documentaries today and how they measure the metrics of success of a film. And documentaries are particular because there's often a goal for impact once a film is released. But how do you at Nat Geo measure the metrics of success of a film, and how does that influence your strategy for your next slate?
That's a really good question, and something my team and I were actually just talking about yesterday, right, guys? Yeah, they're over there, right in front of you. Did they feed you that question, by the way? So we look at a lot of we call them KPIs, key performance indicators. It's one of those weird corporate words, but success isn't just one thing for us. So impact that you referenced, very important. Once in a while, box office. I mean, Free Solo, I don't know if we'll ever repeat that. It's different times now. We're, post-pandemic, who knows? But we definitely look at box office, and we also look at the streaming performance on Disney Plus. And I think we also talk a lot about our docs need to kind of elevate and amplify our brand, which is a lot more elusive and difficult to measure, obviously. But we know when a doc that we have has really sort of permeated the culture. We know it anecdotally from getting texts and emails from people, but we also, I think Free Solo is probably the best example of a doc we've made that talk about non-doc people loving a doc. I mean, it really appealed to such a broad group of people, and so specific performance metrics on Disney Plus are definitely something we're going to be looking at, but also zeitgeist, which again, very hard to measure. Being part of the cultural conversation, hard to measure. My husband is the president of FX, and they had a show this summer called The Bear that is performing very, very well on Hulu, and they're very happy with the performance metrics on Hulu, but what they're probably even more happy with is that everyone is talking about The Bear. And, it's harder for a doc to permeate the culture, I think, but because I come out of scripted, like, I want to be at a restaurant and hear the people at the next table talking about one of our docs. Like that, then I know we've done something right. So we look at a lot of different things. If a film doesn't perform that well from a streaming perspective, but really can help enact change, positive change in the world, we've done our jobs. So it's never just one thing. We look at a lot of different, again, KPIs, we call them.
The Bear is very, very good. Maybe one more audience question. I think we have, sorry to make you run, but back here on the side.
Hi, I'd love to hear about the future of the doc business from your perspective. Where do you see it going in the next 5 to 10 years? What kinds of films? And how do you fit into that piece? And what would you like it to be?
Well, I would say in terms of the future, I feel like the future is really bright, even as compared to, I don't know, 5 6 years ago. There's so many opportunities for doc storytellers, doc filmmakers to, um, match with financiers and streamers and sort of get their content out into the world. So it feels like there's lots and lots of opportunities today as compared to, again, a few years ago. It's hard for me to know, obviously, because I'm not Nostradamus, about exactly where it's headed. But it feels like the future is really bright, and I think there's a whole new sort of cohort of filmmakers coming up who are getting opportunities now that I think would have been more difficult to get a few years ago, just from a diversity perspective, a cultural diversity perspective. And I think there's, just a lot. I mean, and to put it crudely, there's just a lot of places that want to pay good money to make great docs. So, whether it's doc series, which has exploded obviously in the last few years, or feature docs, or even shorts, it just feels like there's so much opportunity. And from in terms of looking into the future, I think that's going to continue. I hope it's going to continue. I mean, in terms of me, I don't know. I mean, I love my job. I hope you can tell that. I really do love it. It's been incredibly fun and gratifying and challenging to learn a new part of the entertainment business. After I've been doing another thing for so long. So I just want to keep doing it and keep supporting filmmakers and work with a new group of filmmakers. I mean, we're very happy we have some repeat business. I think that's always a good sign. So we have, a whole bunch of movies coming up with Jimmy Chin and Chai Vassarelli. This movie Retrograde with Matt Heineman is our second feature with him, but we're also working with a lot of folks that we've never worked with before, that we didn't even have relationships with before. So that's been really exciting. So I'm very content doing what I'm doing into the future. And I don't really look to the left and to the right in terms of what other folks are doing. I mean, I like watching other streamers, documentaries, but I'm really focused on what we're doing, because I think we're in a very specific lane in terms of what we do. So I'm really just focused on making our stuff great and making our filmmakers happy and bringing their stories to the world. It's, I love storytelling. The kind of storytelling I normally work on is, I think entertainment's really important. I think, people getting a little escape from their real lives, everyday lives, is really important. But this kind of storytelling that we do at Nat Geo is really soul nourishing. And that's been wonderful to be part of. And I think it's also a wonderful thing to put out into the world. So I'm very happy today and hopefully many years from now.
Carolyn Bernstein.
Thank you.
And Nat Geo, I believe, is throwing a little party later tonight.
Yes, we are. Everyone should come.
All right. Thanks. Have a great day.